Hello Scouts. Today we're going to make some cornbread, but it's just not going to be, first of all, any cornbread. We're going to doctor it up a little bit, but I wanted to use this as an opportunity to talk about cooking things in a Dutch oven when maybe the Dutch oven that you have available to you is a little bit bigger. So certainly if you were in a smaller patrol, maybe 4 people on that camp out, you wouldn't necessarily need 2 boxes of Jiffy cornbread mix to be able to feed your patrol. But if you took and put that cornbread mix in this 12-inch Dutch oven, it's going to be very thin on the bottom and it's going to be prone to burning. Now certainly not every troop has the luxury, or Scout has the luxury, of having an 8-inch, which would be perfect for that, or a 10-inch Dutch oven. So how would you do it if you just have the standard 12-inch Dutch oven? So I'm going to give you some ideas on how to deal with that. So we have our standard 12-inch regular Dutch oven that a lot of troops use as their go-to Dutch oven. So how do we deal with a smaller quantity? Well, certainly we could use a pan, a foil pan like this. Actually a pan, if you have one of the old school metal mess kits, you could use one of those pans. If you're doing maybe 2 boxes like I'm going to do today, maybe one of these foil 9-inch in diameter baking pans would be great for that. That's an option. But many of us have trail chefs or cook kits that our troop provides us for our patrol that include these frying pans that are also act as the lid of a pot. And they would work perfectly for using it as a baking pan within your Dutch oven. So do we just put, this Dutch oven is cool, do we just put the pan in the bottom? I suppose we could, but why not take the advantage of elevating the pan so we get some airspace below and we can ensure that the bottom of that cornbread comes out perfect. So one of these cooling racks that you can get at a kitchen supply store that's typically used to cool off a cake or whatever, you could put that in the bottom of your Dutch oven and place your pan on top of it. One of the other things that you could do if you don't have one of those cooling racks is take some aluminum foil and create a ball of aluminum foil. And what you want to do is create some balls that are crushed down just a little bit so they'll sit flat. We could take the foil circles and put them underneath. I'll do it upside down just so I could show you. So envision this right side up. We could put these pieces of foil underneath our pan so that when it's sitting in the Dutch oven, it's elevated and creates that space. So now I have my pan inside the Dutch oven and it's elevated with a nice airspace above it. So these 3 pieces of foil, balled up, crushed down a little bit to have some flat surfaces so it's not rolling around and everything, would be a perfect solution as well. So one of the key things to do when you're cooking like a cornbread, where the batter could be on the thinner side, or at least as it starts to cook, it'll level out or even out, is making sure that the surface that you're cooking on is level. So this Dutch oven table, before we started filming and I set up, I made sure it was perfectly level, front to back and end to end. And this way, with my Dutch oven seated on it, the batter will level out and I'll have an even thickness cornbread. Now, not only does that make the cornbread look more appetizing, but it actually ensures that it cooks more evenly. So envision if you had a cornbread where the batter was a 1/2 inch thick and at the other end it was 1 inch thick, chances are the thinner end would be burnt and the thicker end would be still undercooked by the time you went to serve it. So those are some of the tricks for setting up and being prepared within a larger Dutch oven, cooking a smaller batch than would fit in the bottom of the Dutch oven. So with my wire rack left in my Dutch oven, it's time to get our Dutch oven preheating. I'm going to do a ring of coals underneath the Dutch oven. It'll end up being about 10 coals. That's the diameter of the Dutch oven, less 2. But I'm using the ring method, which is a lot easier to keep track of when you're doing it. So I've got my bed of coals. Then I'm going to situate my Dutch oven right over it. Now I'm going to take and put a ring of coals around the perimeter. Now during my setup, my coals are a little bit further along than I typically like, but I guess that's better than not having them ready to go when it's time to preheat. So we may have to add a little bit more once we get going, but if you time it correctly, you can get the most life out of your coals. So I probably have a greater count than normal because my coals have burned down a little bit. So I'm going to get my chimney set up on the side. I'm going to add some additional briquettes because you always want to make sure you have enough to get fully through your baking cycle, and I'll be right back. So I mentioned we're going to doctor up our cornbread a little bit, but we'll start first by doing a traditional mix with the Jiffy cornbread. And I've always said, you know, you can make your own cornbread from cornmeal and add the baking powder and the other ingredients that you need to do. But Jiffy Cornbread has been making this cornbread for decades and decades, and they've pretty well got it down to a science. So why not go with that ready to go mix and have that be your base. So if you read the direction, for each box we're going to need 1 egg and we're going to need 1/3 cup of milk. So I'm going to start with my wet ingredients, and I'm going to get my eggs in and my milk in. So let's start with our eggs. So let's get prepared with our milk. We're going to be doing 2 boxes, so that means we're going to need 2/3 or 1/3 plus 1/3 cups of milk. And I've got my measuring cup here, and I will get 2/3 cups of milk in it. Now I suppose ahead of time, if this was the only thing I was using milk for, I could have measured it out in my Nalgene bottle here, smaller bottle, and been prepared to go. So I've got my 2/3 cups of milk. With that in, I'm going to take and I'm going to break down the yolks and incorporate it with the milk. So one of the other things I want to do is I want to add some whole kernel corn in with my cornbread to try to add some different flavors and some different texture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the can, and I'm going to properly following leave no trace principles, eliminate the water from within it, because I don't want to add the water that's in with the can in with the cornbread mix because it'll make it too runny or too wet. So with the water drained from my corn, I'm just going to set it aside for a moment. And what I want to do is I want to take and I want to add a little bit of some hot pepper, a hot pepper that we grew in our garden, and we're going to put it in here. I'm going to put on some gloves just so that I don't have any issues because this is going to be hot, and if I were to have it on my hands and then touch my eyes or whatever, I'm not going to be a happy camper. And one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to take and remove the stem. I'm going to chop this finely, and the other thing I want to do is remove the seeds from the inside of this pepper. Start with the stem. Then I'll take and I'll cut it right in half. Then using my finger, I'll take and remove these seeds and put them in the garbage. All right, so I have my 2 peppers, and now what I'll do is just give them a fine chop. Starting by cutting it in some long strips. So with a cut in some long strips, I'll bring it together so that they're lined up, and I'll just give it a nice fine chop. So when my pepper's chopped, I'm going to switch back over to the Jiffy cornbread mix and add the dry ingredients into my eggs and milk. So now I'll take and whisk the wet ingredients and the dry ingredients. So I'm done with my whisk, but I don't want to make a mess. And these boxes act as a great whisk holder. So I'll put that to the side. And now what I'll do is I'm going to take and I'm going to add the can of corn. Now, if I was doing one box, I could go with a smaller can. This is a 15-ounce can, and they make cans that are about 7 ounces. That would have been perfect for one box of Jiffy cornbread, but I'm doing 2, so I'm going to use a whole can, a 15-ounce can. And now what I'll do is I'll add those hot peppers. Now I'm going to switch over to a rubber spatula and mix this all together. So now with my batter all prepared, I'm going to take my inside lid or small frying pan from my Trail Chef container. I'm going to take some nonstick oil and just give it a quick coating on the inside, because I want to make sure that my cornbread doesn't stick to the baking pan. So now with the nonstick oil in my baking pan, I'm going to add the prepared batter. Now what I want to do is take and just move the batter around just to make sure that it's of even thickness inside of our pan. So with my gloves on and my lid lifter in my hand, I'm going to go to our preheated Dutch oven and I'm going to remove the lid. Put it on a lid stand. And remember, I've got that wire rack in the bottom. And now we're going to carefully put our cornbread pan right inside. Put the lid back on. Give it a little turn to make sure it's seated. And we'll start baking this, and we'll keep an eye on it, and we'll keep checking. I'll use a knife to stick in it, or you could use a toothpick or a whittled off stick, and just make sure it comes out clean, just like baking a cake, to make sure that the batter is baked all the way through. Periodically through the baking process, I'm going to take my lid, I'm going to give it a turn of about 1/3 one direction. I'm going to take my bail of my Dutch oven, this wire, I'm going to lift up on the lid lifter and drop it down and go 1/3 of a spin in the opposite direction. This is going to help even out the baking temperature on the inside, especially with the top, to ensure that we don't have areas that get burnt while other areas are not as cooked. They'll be watching the volume of coals on the top and the bottom to make sure we have adequate heat throughout the entire baking process. Typically when baking, especially if it were directly in the Dutch oven, I have to be careful not to add too much additional heat afterwards on the bottom because it's in direct contact with that cast iron. By having this pan up on the trivet, it's more forgiving. So I don't have to be as careful. I still want to be careful, but I don't have to be as careful. Note as I'm adding coals, I'm spacing them out equally around the top of the Dutch oven to tuck a fresh coal in between the other existing coals. And I'll do the same on the bottom. Well, Scouts, while I was setting up the cameras, I could smell the cornbread, and that typically means it's done, even without checking it with a knife. But we're going to go in and we're going to put a paring knife into it and make sure it comes out clean. And let's just take a look at our cornbread. So one of the things that helps lead me to believe that we're done is the fact that it's pulling away from the sides. Take our paring knife in, and it is coming out nice and clean. So I think I can get my hands down in there. And there's our cornbread. Look at that. Delicious cornbread. Now, this isn't just your Jiffy cornbread, just out of the box with nothing added, plain Jane. This is a kicked up cornbread that has hot peppers in it. We added a can of corn for the 2 boxes of cornbread mix. We took advantage of using a wire rack in the bottom of our Dutch oven and using a smaller pan so we didn't have to fill up the whole bottom of the oven. Reality is we probably would have been okay with 2 and a 12-inch, but definitely if we were using 1 box of Jiffy, we definitely would have wanted to use a smaller container, one of those foil pans or a smaller pan than this. So here is a great simple recipe that starts off with 2 boxes of Jiffy cornbread mix, 2 eggs, 2/3 cups of milk. We added a 15-ounce can of whole kernel corn, We added a hot pepper that we finely diced up and put it in there, and it's going to give some great color to, you can already see the color coming through the top. Our cornbread is nicely browned on the top, pulled away from the edges, and this is going to be delicious. The only thing that could be better is if we took a stick of butter and actually, while it's hot, you could run that stick of butter over the top of this and let it ooze down in. Otherwise, you certainly can have it off to the side for your patrol mates. However you like it, butter or not butter, get out there, have some fun with your patrol mates. Make up some cornbread or some other quick breads in your Dutch oven, but most of all, get out there in the great outdoors and enjoy yourself.